Mario Kart is an extremely popular franchise, and with anything popular, you're going to have ripoffs. Sometimes they're really good, and sometimes they're not. Somehow, the best part of this game was turning it off. So over the last few months, I went on a quest, and I played as many Mario Kart ripoffs as I could possibly find. And today, we're gonna see which ones were great and which ones were not, starting from the least obscure to the most. Of all of the different kart racers I've played throughout my life, Diddy Kong Racing has always stood out. From the moment you turn this on, you could immediately tell that this was inspired by Mario Kart 64. And honestly, I would rather play this than Mario Kart 64. Don't get me wrong, both are great games, but can you play as Conker in Mario Kart? I didn't think so. Unlike Mario Kart, Diddy Kong Racing has a full story mode. The story isn't gonna win an Oscar, but at least it was something. There's an evil wizard called Whizpig who's causing a lot of trouble, and Diddy Kong and his friends, including Conker and Banjo, have to stop him. Gameplay wise, this is very similar to Mario Kart, where you race around a track, use items to hurt your opponents, and ultimately try and win the race. But there were a couple things this game did to really stand out. First, all of the different races were accessed through different hub worlds. There were 5 separate hub worlds, and each contained 4 separate races, a challenge level, and a boss level. So structurally, it does stuff very different, which really helps it stand out. As far as playable characters, there are 10 separate characters, 2 of which you have to unlock by playing the game, but it has some of Rare's best characters like Banjo, Conker, and TT. Oh my god, someone drowned that thing! I'm really glad they added characters from other Rare games to this title. They could have ignored these characters completely, but they ended up adding them, which was a brilliant idea. Even if this weird looking clock is going to give me nightmares for the rest of my life. But the most substantial difference between this and a Mario Kart game is that you could not only ride in a car, but you could also use a hovercraft and a plane. And that is the detail that I think was the most important part of the game. It doesn't matter if you're driving, using a hovercraft, or flying a plane, everything feels so crisp. And considering this came out for the N64 with a controller that looks like an anchor, the fact that they made a racing game that was this good was absolutely incredible. This game was one of the reasons it was devastating that Rare was acquired by Microsoft. We were supposed to get multiple sequels, and I would have absolutely loved that. But as it stands, Diddy Kong Racing is an incredible game, and I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. And unlike Diddy Kong Racing, the next series ended up getting a few sequels, and that was the Sonic Racing games. There were 3 separate titles in the Sonic Racing format that were released over the course of a decade. Justice for Sonic! Justice for Sonic! The first game was Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing. This released in 2010 for a bunch of different consoles, and it was your typical kart racer containing a bunch of Sega's best known characters from Sonic and beyond. You could play this game on pretty much every single console at the time, including a BlackBerry. I don't know about you, but I haven't seen a BlackBerry in about 10 years, so it seems only natural to blame Sonic All-Star Racing for that. If you've played a Mario Kart game, you've pretty much played this. You're doing laps, collecting power-ups, and trying to win a race. As far as different characters, you have a wide selection. There are a load of fan favorites from the Sonic series like Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, and of course, Big the Cat, because this game would not be good without him. And as far as non-Sonic characters go, you had some great picks like Amigo, Beat, and Billy Hatcher. The courses in this game look absolutely phenomenal. The tracks are bright and colorful, but not enough to where it's distracting. And overall, as a first Sonic kart racer, it was not bad at all. But they really hit their stride with the next game, and that was Sonic All-Star Racing Transformed. Now, the basic elements of the gameplay remain mostly the same. You pick a track, you pick your character, and you race. The main difference here, though, is that your vehicle will undergo transformations at certain points during a race. Oh, that's why they call it Transformed? I thought Optimus Prime was going to be in this game. During certain points of a race, you'll pass through a transformation gate, and then you will transform into whatever type of vehicle is needed for that section of the race. At certain points, you'll fly, and at other points, you'll ride on water, but it doesn't really matter because every single time it's going to be incredible. Like a lot of games, when you play, you earn XP. There are a lot of different unlockables like vehicle customization options, and it's really great to have something to work towards while playing the game. Just like the last game, there's a huge selection of Sonic and non-Sonic characters to play, with some of them making a lot of sense and others being really weird. You have characters like Knights coming into the game, which makes sense, and then you get stuff like Wreck-It Ralph, which makes less sense, and then then there's Danica Patrick, which makes even less sense, and then there was Simon from the Yogg's cast, and that's where they entirely lost me. He was added as a DLC made for charity, but if I could be added to a Sonic game if I gave all the money to charity, you bet your bottom dollar I would absolutely do it. The tracks look even better in this game, and you combine that with everything being far more engaging with the transformation gameplay, and you have a perfect example of what a sequel should be. So you would think they would keep this theme going for the next game. Oh, Sega, what have you done? Team Sonic Racing changed the formula a lot. And to be honest, I do like this game, but I can see why a lot of people were very disappointed. The first major change is that they fired every other Sega character that was racing before. So now you only have the Sonic characters, and that alone is a big enough change to put off a lot of people. Another major change is that this focuses on team mechanics more similar to Mario Kart Double Dash than anything else, but still very different. You're not sharing a kart like in Double Dash, you're more so just working along with other racers as a team, and the more I play it, the more I hate this change because I don't want to race with other people, I just want to race by myself. It does add a good amount of strategy, which is missing in other kart racers, but if you liked playing as other Sega characters, then this was a downgrade in pretty much every capacity. That's not to say this is bad, because compared to a lot of these other games, it's really good. But of these three games, this is definitely the weakest. It's a series of games where you get to play as Sonic who's driving a car. It's fun, but no matter what explanation they give, it will never make sense to me. Sega making these games does not really make sense. I can understand from a loose perspective that Sonic will be faster than anybody in a foot race, so it's fine if they don't want to do that, but they already had Sonic Riders, which was an entirely unique premise and it was really good. They just needed more entries in the series. Sure, some of the games had a steep learning curve, but they could have simplified it and not just put Sonic in a cart because Mario was doing it. But again, these games aren't bad, I just don't understand how they ended up making them. The next series also had a couple entries, and that was the Crash Bandicoot racing games. For a long time, Crash Bandicoot was one of the most popular video game characters of all time. The Crash games are a good time even if I end up wanting to break my controller while playing it. So when Sony ended up making a Crash Bandicoot racing game, I had one thought in my head. Ugh, really? There were a lot more of these games than I expected, so I only played two. The first being Crash Team Racing, and the second being Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. The original Crash Team Racing released for the PlayStation. There's a light story where Crash is trying to enter a racing tournament, but an alien named Nitrous Oxide comes from space just to tell everybody on Earth that he is the fastest racer and he will beat anyone in a race. This challenge ends up having Crash and all of his friends and enemies get behind the wheel to end up having a kart racing adventure. Now this is where the games get very similar to Mario Kart, because this was pretty much a carbon copy with Crash Bandicoot characters. As far as characters go, there was a pretty solid selection, with 15 playable characters, 8 being there by default and 7 being unlockable, and overall this feels just like a Mario Kart game. The controls are not as polished, but you'll get used to it very fast. The gameplay is pretty straightforward, where you race around the track and use power-ups to ensure that you end up in first place, and along the way you pick up Wumpa Fruit where you can hold up to 10, which make your car go faster for each one you have. But the biggest change between this and Mario Kart is that this had a much bigger focus on drifting, with some pretty unique drifting mechanics. When you drift, there's a meter on the lower right side of the screen that fills up, and while drifting you can boost up to 3 times in a single drift. It's an interesting mechanic, and I'm glad they added it because it added something that made this feel a little bit different from Mario Kart, and overall it's not a bad game. I'm a huge fan of Crash Bandicoot and I love kart racers, so this was a great idea. And 20 years later we ended up getting Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, which is a game I didn't think I was gonna like as much as I did. The gameplay here is very clearly inspired by the original on the PlayStation, and it's more so reimagining that game with modern technology than it is being its own unique racing game, and I think that was a great idea. It has the same kart racing mechanics as every other game we've talked about. This time there is a massive selection of characters, and they even brought some great ones over like Spyro, which is great to see because there are 56 separate characters you can race as in this game. They also added kart customization, which has become a standard in kart racers at this point, where you can use Wumpa coins to buy different features for your cars. There are 39 separate tracks to race on, and everything about this game looks good and feels polished. Now Crash Bandicoot isn't nearly as popular as he was back in the 2000s, but that doesn't mean that they still can't make incredible games. And if you like kart racers, I 100% recommend checking this out. It is on sale pretty frequently, and I think I picked this game up for about $20, and it was money well spent. But the last last big notable video game franchise that delved into the world of kart racers was Pac Man. In the mid-2000s, Pac Man was going through an identity crisis. He's still one of the most easily recognizable characters of all time, but when you would bring up Pac Man to someone and tell them they were still making games, everyone kind of had the same reaction.
Oh, that is a shame.
And one of the games that was released during that identity crisis was Pac Man World Rally. Now, to give credit where credit's due, they combined Pac Man and kart racing really well in this game. It plays like a typical kart racer, but it does have some Pac Man mechanics in it that make it really stand out. When you're driving around, you collect the little yellow buttons that you'll see in a Pac Man game and you'll fill up your Pac meter. When it's full, you'll turn into the Pac-Mobile and you can eat your opponents for a short amount of time, similar to how you would in a standard Pac Man arcade game. And just like the original, there are fruits you can eat, but instead of giving you bonus points, they make it so you can hit shortcuts easier. There was a surprisingly good selection of characters in this game. Of course, there was Pac Man and Miss Pac Man and all of the ghosts, but you could also play as the Pac Devil and the Prince from Katamari, which was something that I did not expect at all. There was a good amount of racetracks in this game and they all looked surprisingly great, and they even had a battle mode in this game that was really fun. So as far as kart racers go, this was one that I was pleasantly surprised by. A lot of the Pac Man games during this time were actually really good. It's just a shame that everybody only sees Pac Man as a one-dimensional character. And honestly, if they were to make a new one of these games, I would probably buy it. But let's be honest, I don't see that happening anytime soon. If anything, he'll get put in a new Mario Kart. But now it's time to get a little weird.
I'm down to get weird. Oh, no, not like that.
The next games fall into one of two categories. Either most of their characters are not super recognizable, or they are recognizable, but they have no business being in a kart racer. The first of which was Mod Nation Racers. I want whatever PlayStation was on in the early 2010s. With games like Mod Nation Racers and Little Big Planet, they had a focus on games that were infinitely replayable and full of customization. The Little Big Planet games are some of my favorite of all time. So when Mod Nation Racers came out and had a similar feel, I was super excited. And this game was pretty great. Now gameplay wise, you're not getting into anything super crazy. It feels like a typical kart racer. You would race around the track doing a certain amount of laps. Along the way, you're picking up items, or in this case, weapons, because Sony decided to choose violence whenever they could. But what really made this game stand out was the creation station. Pretty much everything you see in this game was entirely customizable. From the carts to the characters to even making your own tracks. There was a limitless amount of customization that kept me absolutely glued to this game. And at the time, you could share all of your customizations online. So if you made a really great stage, you could share it with people across the world, similar to how Mario Maker works. And to me, that made this game an absolute classic. If a game has hundreds of hours of content that you could dump into it without getting bored, you know they did something right. And the game's creators ended up making another game, and that was Little Big Planet Karting. Like I said, Little Big Planet is a game series that I love to death. I put an egregious amount of time into it, and it's a shame they haven't made any more of these games recently. That being said, Little Big Planet Karting is fine. I prefer Mod Nation Racers, but I'm not gonna say this game was bad. Like Mod Nation Racers and the other Little Big Planet games, there was an emphasis on customization, but it didn't really work as well as any of the other titles in the series. That's not to say it wasn't fun, but it was just really annoying to have to try and put stickers on things, when in the main series games and in Mod Nation Racers, it worked really well. But one thing they did to really stand out, which worked well, was adding the grappling hook to races. It does not make sense at all, but it's still a really fun time. And one thing this game did really well was had a great battle mode. For some reason, I've never been the biggest fan of battle modes in other kart racers, but this game did a pretty solid job. Battle mode is an 8-person all-out brawl, and honestly, it's a great time. I want them to make another game just so I could have a better version of this. But both Little Big Planet Karting and Mod Nation Racers suffered from the same thing, and that was relying on user-generated content, which is now no longer available. That's not to say that these games are unplayable now, but it's a shame because a lot of the fun that these games had to offer was because you could share things online. But even without that, I think these games are fun and worth checking out. And next up, we had Nickelodeon Kart Racers. I was unaware how many separate kart racers Nickelodeon has made in the last few years. There have been 3 separate kart racers since 2018, all featuring a load of different Nickelodeon characters, and all of them are fine. To be fair, I only own the first one and I've played the other two at a friend's house multiple times. But Nickelodeon has been putting out games recently and I don't really understand it. I get it, use the characters you have, but at least make sure you're doing something that helps you stand out. The first game has 12 playable characters, and I know in later games they flush out that roster a lot, but really 12 characters? You can tell they were catering this game towards people who were born in the 90s because they picked SpongeBob, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Rugrats, and Hey Arnold. And I love all of those cartoons, but there are so many more Nickelodeon IPs they could have pulled characters from. As far as tracks go, these are fine. Most of the tracks look surprisingly similar and they're all full of this neon green slime which Nickelodeon is known for. And I get that's their entire thing, but it is literally everywhere and it's so bright and jarring that it pulls my attention away from anything else that's happening during the race. The games do get better with each installment for the most part, with more playable characters and better tracks, but I can't recommend these games because they're incredibly bland and basic, and it was a clear cash grab to try and capitalize on how popular kart racers are. In a similar vein, the next game was DreamWorks Superstar Karts. The earliest games we're talking about at least had some sort of substance, but the following games are just clear cash grabs. Movie games are usually iconic due to how bad they are. It makes sense, take your famous characters from the movies, make a game out of them, and you're going to sell at least decently well, especially if you put $15 into the development of the game, which is what most of these companies did. DreamWorks Superstar Karts has a bunch of different characters from DreamWorks movies, but for some reason they didn't include Kung Fu Panda, which immediately makes this game bad. But honestly, it was already bad to begin with. Beyond having Shrek in it, there really isn't anything that makes this game stand out. It is a kart racer to the most minimum capacity. If you go in expecting anything more than that, you're going to be disappointed. And I got this game for $3 at the dollar store, and honestly, I still feel like I paid too much.
I will literally pay someone to take this game away from me.
And the next game to take an iconic character and absolutely destroy it was Garfield Kart. Yeah, I can feel my sanity slowly slipping away as I play these games. Garfield Kart is fine, it's Garfield. You can play as a bunch of different Garfield characters if that's something you're into. But something about this specific character really makes me upset. Why are its lips so big? I hate it. For some reason, Garfield has always been incredibly popular, and I have never understood the appeal. He did have his own Nickelodeon show, which was fine, but putting him in a kart racer just seems like a weird idea. There are 8 playable characters and 12 different tracks to race on, and you can tell they made this game just to make it. I think video game companies should just hire me to sit in a boardroom and yell at them when they come up with ideas like this, because this is clearly just another cash grab, and honestly, I don't know who this was made for. Save yourself some time, money, and chest pain, and just skip this and most of the other games because the only reason I'm playing them is for science. And up next is Looney Tunes Space Race. Of all the kart racers I played, I think this one was the most surprising, because honestly, it wasn't that bad. It definitely feels a little dated, but honestly, I'll take that. I have never been the biggest Looney Tunes guy. It was popular somehow both before and after my childhood, so when I went in to play this game after playing things like Garfield Kart, I expected it to be the absolute worst, but somehow I was decently impressed. There are 9 playable characters, 3 of which you have to unlock by playing the game, which is something that a lot of these shovelware kart racers don't really do, and that's give you a reason to actually play it. The items are kind of bland, they don't do anything that's that crazy, and there's a decent turbo boosting mechanic which is pretty fun, and surprisingly there are a lot of unlockable tracks to get to, even though they're just different flavors of the tracks that are already in the game. But the biggest crime this game has is the fact that I can't play as Lola Bunny. So out of all of these weird kart racers, I actually would recommend playing this one if you have it. I'm not gonna say go out and buy it, but if you do, you're not gonna be upset. And somehow on the same day this released in the US, Mickey's Speedway USA also released. I was working on a different video when I then realized that Mickey Speedway USA was made by Rare, and I hadn't played this before, so naturally I spent too much money on it, and to be honest, I was decently impressed with how good this game really is. This game uses the same engine as Diddy Kong Racing, so if you like that, you'll probably like this. You race around different tracks modeled after US cities, and the tracks aren't bad, but they're not really that great. But what really blew me away was how good this game feels gameplay-wise. Using the same engine as Diddy Kong racing, I knew I was gonna have at least a decent game, but I was pleasantly surprised about how fun it was. When I was originally playing it, I didn't think it was that great, but then I ended up wanting to play it more and more. There were a couple unlockable characters like Huey, Dewey, and Louie, but maybe it's because I played this after playing Garfield, Kart, and DreamWorks Racing. I enjoyed this far more than I thought I would. I'm not gonna say you should go out of your way to buy it, but it was definitely not that bad. And honestly, neither was the next game, and that was Disney Speedstorm. Now, somehow Disney Speedstorm is both good and bad at the same time. The core gameplay itself is really solid. I'm not really the biggest Disney person. I've seen the movies, so I get a lot of the references, but if you are a Disney fan, the tracks are full of a load of things to keep you happy. There are so many different characters to play as, and all of them have their own unique skills and abilities, which is not only useful but full of fan service, and the racing itself does not feel bad at all. However, this game is a complete gacha game. I personally stay away from anything that's freemium or gacha, just because I don't love that model of game. I'm fine if a game is free and they just try and sell you cosmetics, but when it becomes pay to win, that's when I start to have an issue. I love that this game is free, but considering the main demographic for Disney is children, and they will just throw advertisements in your face about paying for premium currency, just to make the game a little bit easier completely turns me away. You can play this game and not spend $1, which is what I did, but for that exact reason, I'm not gonna recommend it. If the game was a full package, I would pay $60 for it because it is fun, but I don't like the fact that they're always trying to sell me something. So if you don't mind that, go for it, but if you do, then probably stay away from this. But I saved the best game for last. For some reason, there is a Burger King kart racer called Pocket Bike Racer. Alright, this game is not something that I'm gonna recommend, but it was literally $1. For a limited time in 2006, if you went to Burger King and you got a value meal, you could pay an additional $4 and get one of 3 different titles. And this was one of the games. Now, gameplay-wise, is this great? Absolutely not. Is it even fun? No, not really, but for some reason, it is still a great time. Maybe it's because I feel nostalgic about it, but I don't know, I love this game, even though it is the biggest pile of trash you'll ever play. To put it simply, this is a game where you race as the Burger King, and to be honest, this game is not worth the disc it's printed on, but the fact that it exists in the first place and that Burger King had the audacity to make this, makes this easily one of the best meme racers of all time. Now, of the 3 Burger King games, I think Big Bumpin' was the best. That's not to say that any of these games are good, but if you're looking for an obscure game to play with friends, I honestly can't think of a better title to make everybody go,
You need to go talk to a therapist.
As always, thank you for watching. I hope you and your family have an incredible rest of your day, and if you like anything that you saw here, please consider subscribing.